everyone. I'm so excited to have you all here today. We have a fantastic group today. These are the Mystery Writers Roundtable, and I'm so excited. These are all mystery writers who are local to my area, Seattle area, and I'm going to have them talk a little bit about a group called Sisters in Crime, but we'll get to that. But to begin, I just want to introduce you. We have three amazing authors here today, and here they are. There they are. We've got Jen Pitts in the top right. We've got Marty Wingate in the bottom left, and Alice K. Boatwright in the bottom right. So thank you all for coming. Welcome.
Welcome. Nice to be here.
Hey. So I want to start by having everybody introduce yourselves, and we have a very exciting moment that we're right in the middle of. We're recording on October 29th, which is Thursday, and I'm putting this up on November 1st, which is Sunday. And in between now and then, Jen's second book is coming out. So Jen, why don't you start by introducing yourself? Yay! Congratulations!
Yay! Thanks. Yeah, I'm Jen Pitts, and I am the author of the French Quarter Mystery Series. So my books take place in New Orleans, which is my favorite city in the world, although I live here in the Pacific Northwest and love it too. The first book was called The Key to Murder, and the second book that's coming out on Halloween is called The Gates to the Afterlife. So I love mystery since I can remember, from Nancy Drew to Agatha Christie and now anything and everything. I particularly like cozies, but I'll read any kind of mystery at all. So I'm excited to be here and talk shop.
So excited for you. Just huge good luck for your book. That's awesome.
Thanks.
Okay, Marty, tell us about you. I'm going to put up your little slide and tell us about you.
All right, I'm Marty Wingate, and I'm the author of the first edition Library Mysteries books. Placed strategically over my shoulder here. The first book, The Bodies in the Library, came out last October, and the second book, Murder is a Must, comes out on December 1st. And the storyline, the story takes place in Bath in England and concerns a library full of rare and collectible books from the golden age of mystery. So all of the famous authors that we know about, the women authors mostly. And it's a present day series. So, and my protagonist knows nothing about mysteries. And so that's my way of leading the reader through. Many readers know a lot about the mysteries and some don't know anything. So it's a good way to bring them through. And I love mysteries, borrowing a line from my protagonist, Haley. Mystery is a convention. It's a way of telling a story. It's a framework. And although I did not read Nancy Drew when I was growing up, my first favorite mystery series was the Rabbi series by Harry Kimmelman. Monday, the rabbi did this. Tuesday, the rabbi did that. I love traditional mysteries, and that's what I like to write with an amateur sleuth.
Mm-hmm. So yours is amateur sleuth. Jen, is yours amateur sleuth as well? Okay.
Yes, it is. Yep.
And Alice, I think that leads us to you. And yours, I think, is also an amateur sleuth.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alice Boatwright, and I write the Ellie Kent mysteries, which are also with an amateur sleuth. Ellie is an American who falls in love with an English vicar and moves to his village in the Cotswolds. And of course, she is supposed to be the new vicar's wife, but her job description becomes quite varied very quickly. She discovers body in the churchyard, and because she's the outsider, they all decide that she must have been the murderer. So almost that trope of the person becoming a sleuth because they have to defend their own reputation and prove that they did not commit. That's the initial one. So
excellent. And I'll just do me real quick. I'm Pam Stucky, and I'm the host of this event, and I have my own books up. The top row here are my mysteries. I've got the Megan Montaigne mysteries, which take place up in the Skagit Valley area in Washington State. And then the first book also takes place up there, or the last book on the list there, Death at Glacier Lake, was my first, and it's a standalone. And I'm working now on a new series that's going to take place in the Oregon coast. So that's very fun. So, okay, well, let's get back to everyone. There we are again. Okay, so tell me, I'm interested in the fact that we all have chosen amateur sleuths. And I kind of, I have an idea why I did, but I'd be love to hear why you guys chose an amateur sleuth versus a police procedural, a retired detective, whatever it might be. So, Marty, let's start with you.
Well, I don't know enough about the police to be entirely accurate. I make a point detective caricature in books. The police in my series and in my two previous series are quite competent. But I love the fact that a protagonist who is not a police officer and not a PI, a professional person, can see things in a different light. And in fact, I had the detective constable in this series in the second book in Murder is a Must that's coming out, say to Haley, the protagonist, I like to sit down and talk away from the police station. Let's just have coffee because you see things that we don't see and you pick up on things. And so I like that. And I like in my first series, the protagonist was a gardener. So obviously all those storylines had to be. And sometimes it's true that somebody outside the inquiry can come up and say, yeah, but wait a minute. So that's what I love about a traditional mystery and an amateur sleuth.
Jen or Chris, either of you want to comment?
Well, I'd agree. I like that amateur sleuths see things in a different perspective. I think I've always wanted to be a detective. Maybe I was in a previous life, so I like that. But with an amateur sleuth, they can get away with a lot of things that the police couldn't do. So I kind of like that ability, and I like that amateur sleuths rely on their friendships, which I think is such a trademark of Cozy's, the friendships and sense of community. So I like that they can go outside of the box and do things that police can't do or shouldn't do. So, and also I didn't want to do that kind of research either. So
research. Alice, what about you? Similar?
Well, like Marty and Jen, I was not really interested in writing about police. Right now I'm reading the Vera Stanhope mysteries. And I hardly really call them police procedurals, but she is in fact a police inspector. But in what I have enjoyed about it, I think I'm just attracted to that kind of mystery. One of my early influences was Mary Stewart when I was a teenager, and just loved that these young women could really drive fast cars. So they spoke different languages and they got mixed up in all these things and they solved murders. That was much more appealing to me than being somebody who comes to a job, on a Monday morning, what's in your inbox? Oh, a murder. Okay. So you have to really, writing about an amateur sleuth, you have to be quite inventive about how and why the sleuth becomes involved in the story.
Yes. Yeah.
And also, one of the things that has been interesting about Ellie Kent is because she's the vicar's wife, even though she's an outsider and an expat and an American, so she has a reason why she can go around being a bit nosy, talking to people. And this gives her an opportunity to make links, the kind of complex peripheral links that bring the answer to the puzzle, and the police might be following very diligently a much more standard, door-to-door investigation. It makes it fun.
It does get tricky though, because readers are very aware of what police can and can't do, and so I've had reviewers say, well, you would never do this and you can't do that, and I'm like, well, we're suspending a little bit of disbelief, but I understand and I try to listen to them because we want to make it as real as possible, even though it's fiction. I always think that fiction is just nonfiction that hasn't actually happened in that particular order. So how did you guys decide on, so you're cozy, it sounds like we're all sort of cozy as opposed to, but how did you decide like the level of, I'm gonna say gruesomeness, like mine are pretty non-gruesome. Do you guys get into that kind of detail, and if so, like tell me about that because I'm really interested. I'm curious. Who would like to? Alice, you want to start?
You want me to go? Okay, I can answer that. I don't do gruesome. I don't even watch 99% of the movies that are made today. I don't like to see people hit each other. So that was easy for me to just have the murders usually happen off stage. And I write about murder, but I don't do violence. I know it's a contradiction in terms.
No.
I don't think of my books as cozy, though. I think the cozy, in the spectrum of mysteries from noir and to cozy, I think cozy originally, when people that was Agatha Christie and she started that genre, that the bar has moved slightly, maybe to the left or to the right, whichever way, but I would call Agatha Christie traditional, as Marty was saying. My books have a lot of, I like to think anyway, sort of serious sub-themes. What does it mean to be at home? How do you make a life in a new place? And what's marriage all about? And lots of things are going on that are that I feel are issues that are of great interest to me. And policy of today seems much lighter, or tends to be more humorous. My books, I would like to say, are witty, but they're.
So how do we balance that? Because I think that that's something that's definitely come up for me. Is I'm totally anti-violent, but here I am writing mysteries, and there's murders involved, and so I think about a lot the idea of murder as entertainment, and does that discredit actual victims? Do you ever think about that, and what do you all think about that?
I think that is certainly something that I keep in mind. And although I'm like Alice, the actual violence of the murder is off stage. There have been there's been at least one gruesome murder in one of my other series. But the effect of it's what I see important is, and Alice was talking about this, it's how it's looking at the victim as a person, first of all, and not as a cliche. And it's how that person's death affects everyone. And it affects everyone in different ways. And so you can play with that and see, does it lead the protagonist, because this person is reacting this way, to think, oh, maybe that person is it? So it really gives you a lot to play with when you consider that the death is real and has a real effect on family and friends and enemies, for that matter.
Yeah, I think of murder as a failure of community and relationship and society, and so I kind of approach it from that idea that I think it's like an interesting interplay. What went wrong? How did something happen? But I think it's also fascinating, Jen, I'm going to toss this one to you. I think it's fascinating how many women are interested in murder. And I listened to this podcast called My Favorite Murder. Don't know if you've heard of it. And this question always of why are we so fascinated with murder? And I have a thought, but Jen, I want you to go first.
Sure. Well, I was thinking about when we were talking about cozies, the reason I like cozies is because there is no gore. There's no gruesome details. I personally don't like serial killer books because that doesn't interest me. I'm interested in why the murder happened, what drove someone that far. And that's one reason I loved Agatha Christie growing up, and still do, because it's always about relationships and what people are thinking and why something so dramatic has to happen to cause someone to do it. So that's how I try to write my books, that it's not gory. It's not mindless murder. I mean, no, there should be no murder, but when someone murders in my book, they have a reason behind it. And it's generally, I talk about relationships. And that's why I call my books modern cozies, because I think I do talk more about families and growing up. And I made my protagonist someone who is changing her life. She's not been wronged by a man. Her kids haven't grown up. She's starting off, and this is her new world. But I think going back to your other question, though, about women and murder, I think we're just fascinated by human nature. And I think that is murder is such an extreme emotion, extreme act. So for me, it's always what drove someone to that point, and not a serial killer who's just killing for the pleasure of murder, but what happened in those relationships that caused someone to do that. So.
Do you think that there is merit to the following idea, or do you think it's not true? And this is for anyone, that in order to understand a monster, we have to be able to understand that monster within ourselves. And does that play into the psychology of a murderer in your books and so on? Because I think so. I think it's dangerous. When I was in my 20s, we was at a party with some, a family party with family friends, and this was years and years. I'm only 25 now. That was 30 years ago, and there in the news had been a parent who had been shaking their child, and I, being 23 or whatever, I was like, oh, I can't imagine ever shaking your child. And this woman who was a family friend, a parent who was in her 50s, she's like, oh, I can. And I just so remember that. I'm still not a parent, but, I so remember thinking, she worked in the social field. She was a very kind person, but she had the ability to see that in other people. And now that I'm older, I understand better. So any thoughts on any of that? I'm talking, let someone else talk.
Well,
Go ahead, Marty.
So I understand when you tell us that story as an example, I understand what you mean. And I think that is true. I suppose the difference is the protagonists, the people who are not the murderers, understand that in themselves and know how to control it, because we are a part of society and we want to get, and that has gone wrong in the murder.
Yeah. Alice, you had a thought?
I think it's interesting. It's like an extreme end of a spectrum of behavior. So a lot about what you're doing when you're writing fiction is imagining. And also there is a sort of telegraphic and symbolic aspect. We're not really recreating reality. We're creating something that triggers a feeling of reality, but it's not that likely that it's not. I don't think of it as the Cabot Cove syndrome, but in this sort of kettle of experience that I'm brewing up, it's not that likely that there would be as many extreme instances of behavior as there are in my series. But one of the things I'm working on in my new book is I have a character who is a convicted murderer who's now been released from prison. Because I really wanted to reflect on and try to think, like, how do you live after you've committed murder? In the old days, they would just hang you at the crossroads. That would be that. But nowadays in England, a life sentence is usually only 15 years.
Really?
And it can be released on license. There are always a lot of circumstances. But so this woman, my character, has been in prison for 15 years, and now she's only in her early 40s, and she has to come out and try to figure out how to live a life. And what's your relationship with yourself when you know that you have gone to that extreme? So I found all that very interesting. Some of my other murderers, my books end, they don't deal with the trial and the aftermath. Although I'm interested also in the consequences of these events on the people. And I'm very attracted to books that really look at a crime affects a whole constellation of people.
So Alice, I'm so curious, are you researching that by talking to convicted and released people, or how are you researching that?
I've read memoirs of people who've committed murder and been in prison in England. I also am fortunate. Actually, I know someone who committed murder. So there's that. But also, I have a friend from high school who was a parole officer. He's retired now. So hundreds of murderers
Right.
in his career, and we've talked about this, and so I feel like I have to use my imagination.
Mhm.
Also, I have some backup.
Yeah, awesome. Well, let's take it a little bit lighter. We have a New Orleans, we have two Englands. I want to find out about your settings and have you been to your settings? How are you researching? I occasionally literally use Google Map, and I go down and I drive through the streets on Google Maps. So tell me, let's start with New Orleans. Jen, tell me about how you research and have you been there and everything.
Oh, yeah. My first trip to New Orleans was, 26 years ago, but I fell in love with it reading Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. So, but yeah, it's a city I'd love to live in. Maybe in another life, if I had taken a different path, I might have lived there, but I'm not. So I go at least once a year.
Oh, you do?
Of course, not this year, but I usually go at least once a year, sometimes twice a year. Sometimes we go as a family on a journey. Other times I go by myself, and that's when I do my research. I do every tour I can possibly do. I go to museums, but mostly I sit and just talk to people, because I think you find some of the greatest stories and greatest characteristics or characters you would want to create just by being there. But for this year, obviously, I'm not going, so I am going through all my photos, and I'm going through. I watch webcams of New Orleans because they have one on Bourbon Street I can watch. I do a lot of reading. My second book deals with voodoo and Marie Laveau, so I found some excellent books on Marie Laveau that gave me some more background. But those also have been referred to me by the tour guides of New Orleans, people love their history in New Orleans, so it's very easy when you go there to absorb it, and when you're not there to read about it and talk to people. So that's why I picked New Orleans. I think it's somewhere I would have liked to be, and maybe when my husband and I are in our tiny home driving around the country, we'll stop there for a while if I can convince him. But
Do you think you plan to have several books set there?
I have 6 books plotted already for this series.
Oh my gosh,
out. So I'm a planner. I'm an outliner planner. So I know where I want my character Sammy to go in the next 6 books. After that, I'm not sure.
Good job.
But definitely 6 books.
Marty, how about you? We're going to Bath.
Yes, the first edition library series is set in Bath, and because this is my third series, the other 2 are set in England as well. I had some decisions to make. In the first series, the character moves around Britain, sort of, a fair bit. The second series is set in Suffolk, and so I thought, where would I like to spend? No.
Right.
And we love Bath, and just like Jen, my husband and I travel to England once or twice a year, except for this year, and a lot of time in Bath. So I feel like I'm walking the streets and the lanes and the alleys myself, and I really love. And I think that a lot of readers like that. They want to feel like the place, and we all know our places. And so when I make any change, because Bath, I've made up villages before based on real places, but Bath is Bath. I make very few changes, very few. I changed the name of a pub, but the pub has changed. So I'm glad I can go back in my head or on Google Maps.
Yeah.
And take a look and see what I want. If I need a house or a flat for someone to live in, I get on rightmove.co.uk. A 3-bedroom flat could I find? I've got floor plans of the next house that I'm working on for book 4. It's great to do research online when we can't actually be there.
So handy. Oh my gosh, for sure. And Alice, you're also in England, right?
I'm in England too. I have a fictional village. I did live in the area where my village is placed for about 4.5 years. And before that, my husband and I had gone to that same area of the Cotswolds once or twice a year for a number of years. So that's the home of my heart. And I created my own village because I didn't want to write about my actual village. And also because my actual village was so small, it didn't even have a pub. The public building in it was a church, and there was a bus stop, which was a bench right next to the post box, and that was downtown. So I wanted something a little bit larger, but not one of the touristy places where the parking spaces are all filled by tour buses.
Mm-hmm.
I also have not been able to go there in person for a while, but I use my photos like what everybody else said, and I have to the amazing tip of looking up real estate.
Mm-hmm.
Go to England and you can drive around, but when you look at those real estate ads, you can go right inside the house and see every single room and how it's unbelievable.
That's amazing.
There's great spy resources now. I have a favorite walk that I used to take, and I can walk my walk on Google Maps.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
really go kind of into the mode of being back there. I just walk my walk, and I recognize every tree.
So,
But I'm like, I know there are a lot of authors that write about real places and they've never, ever, ever been there. But even though we can't go to the places we write about right now, except probably Pam, we still have that memory. We have that actual memory. So I think that makes a difference.
I agree. I write scenes that I've been in where I've sat in Jackson Square, listened to the music and ate my beignets. And, so to have those real life experiences that you can give to your characters, I think is really important. At least for me as a writer, it's been very important.
and lets you have so many details that you couldn't necessarily have. If you've been there, you can remember the way the sun angled or the people coming or the smells or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I think lying is really important too, though.
You think it is?
Lying is really important.
Yes.
Of course. As long as
It's all lying. But for those who have created your own towns, which is what I do, I have not written any that exist anywhere real. They're near real places, but they're not. They aren't. What was my question? Oh, Alice? Have you drawn yourself a map, or Marty, for your other books? Have you drawn yourself a map of your towns that you? Because I always have to, otherwise I end up putting things in the wrong places.
I also, because I was dealing with Oxfordshire and the Cotswolds, I actually took a real map and a piece of tracing paper, and then I traced out like the main roads and where's Oxford and where's Chipping Norton and things that I wanted to be clear where they were, and then I placed my fictional towns. And now, as I keep writing each book, I keep making up more names that I throw out. So I have to think, okay, well, where's this little town, and where's that little town, and which way is she actually going? So I don't always do that right away, but eventually I have to really nail it down.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Marty, did you have a thought on that?
I have, like I said, in Bath, I know, where I don't actually say the road where Middlebank House is, but it's a terrace in Bath, and we all know those gorgeous Georgian terraces. And if push comes to shove, I could say the name of it because I know where it is. Yeah. But it's very near the assembly rooms. It's not too far from the Jane Austen Center. Bath is not too far from the Roman Bath. Bath is a city, it's a UNESCO city, World Heritage City. And so people have a sense of it, even if they haven't been there. Although I love the fact that there was a recent two episodes of a police procedural set in Bath. That showed on BritBox or Apron or one of our British stations that was called McDonald and Dodds. And so my husband and I watched it, and I loved it. The well-known long-running series set in Bath, police procedural, is Peter Lovesey's series, Diamond series, which is fabulous, and I love to read. And Peter Lovesey is a great guy, but he sees Bath from a police point of view, and I don't. But he has gone completely factual, and Peter Diamond had to move out of the police station in Bath because they closed it, and now the police station is up by Bristol because it's more, it's a regional. And I just couldn't do that. I have a police station in Bath, and it's where it used to be. It's on Manvers Street. It's now called the One Stop Shop, where you can get a fishing license, and you can do this, and you can do that. But for me, it's still the police station. And on the television show, when they went to the police station in Bath, there were 50 people at desks behind them working. I thought, oh, I'm not the only one that's fudgy.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, I want to talk about murder. So I want to know about your research and how you decide how you're going to kill people off. What ways have you used, and maybe, use your discretion on spoilers if you don't want to say specifically, but and also if you have a Google search if you remember your first Google search that you thought, is the FBI going to come to my door after I hit send? I'm curious about that, or just some of your Google searches, because we get into some stuff, right? Jen, you start.
Yeah, I Google all kinds of things. I was Googling drowning because I want to make sure when someone finds a body, the body's in the right position. So, because someone's going to call you out on that.
Yeah.
So I Google a lot of things there are tons of YouTube videos on things. I found Facebook has been a great resource. There are a lot of groups for writers. There's one called Cops and Writers right now, where police officers will answer people's questions. There's medical ones. My family just ignores my Google searches now, or when I comment about something. So they are, but I don't get too deep into the murders because, again, it's cozy. I don't like gore, but I do try to at least find enough detail so I can describe the body appropriately to the murder. But I don't do guns. I just stuff that's simple, I think, for me as a writer, just because I don't like the gore and the details. But I do want to describe the body correctly. And for me, that's probably more of my Google searches are, how do dead bodies look?
Right.
So,
but
the FBI hasn't shown up yet.
Yeah.
So.
Marty, you have like 15 mystery books, is that right? So you had 15 at least different ways of murdering people.
Well, it's true, Pam. I do try to think now, what have I used before? I don't want to use the same way 2 times in a row.
Right.
But for edition library mysteries, I've got loads of material because each book has something to do with a Golden Age of Mystery author or one of her books. So the bodies in the library was Agatha Christie.
Right.
And so sometimes I am relying on that same method of murder, and sometimes I'm just pulling some threads from that story. Murder is a Must, coming out December 1st. It comes from a Dorothy L. Sayers book, Murder Must Be Advertised, which is my favorite Dorothy L. Sayers book. It was not my favorite book, but it's mine. So the murder happened when someone fell down a spiral staircase, just like in Murder Must Be Advertised. But talking about trying to disguise trying to go on the private search function on when you're researching something. It's actually the only time I've ever done it. Not when I search poison, not when I search any of that. I was writing, I have a historical fiction book coming out in January. It's not a mystery. It's set in World War II and about the women ferry pilots who flew airplanes around the country. And I needed to research what a condom package would look like in 1941. And I thought, here's something I don't want in my history.
Oh, no.
And so I did a secret search, and I found I found one that looked like it had part of a Renoir painting on it.
Oh my God.
This lovely colors with a woman in a floppy hat, and you would never know what was inside. So that's my only secret search. And now it's not secret.
And now everyone knows. This is going to go out to billions of people. So, Alice, how about you? How do you decide how you're going to kill people off?
I'm way too innocent. I didn't even know you could do a secret search on Google.
You can.
When they come after me, they're going to be well equipped. Trying to think. Well, I've done poisoning, strangling, and other things I can't describe without
giving things away. Yeah.
Actually, it's pretty basic. Nothing too dramatic. No dismemberment or things like that, though. But it is interesting, and sometimes what you search just happens to be part of your brain meandering along. And one of the things that I entertained was the issue of whether or not you could you steal your blood from a blood bank, just if you wanted blood, just
And
you
can
wanted. And so I actually went to a blood bank and went through the steps of like getting ready to give blood, and then it turned out my blood pressure was so low. They said, well, you'll probably faint. Well, anyway, what I'm really here for is I just like to ask you some questions.
right?
So I didn't actually have to try to steal my own blood.
That's hilarious.
I found out how the blood is handled after it's been given, and that yes, in fact, you could steal your own blood.
Mm-hmm.
Then I later learned from a fantastic resource, a man named D.P. Lyle.
Mm-hmm.
You can actually just take your own blood yourself and collect it. It's very you have to go through the steps of stealing your blood from a blood bank. So.
I feel like there's so many interesting things that you learn from researching your books, even if it never ends up in the book. Like it just, you go down all these, like Jen, you were talking about drowning.
Yeah.
In one of my books, I was researching and I found that you drown faster in fresh water than you do in salt water. And I was like, and then now everywhere I go, I'm like, did you know that you drown faster? People are like, what are you?
For dinner table conversation.
Right. Well, here's a really good icebreaker that I love. And if you guys haven't already done this, you should. Anytime you meet someone new, ask them, in your profession, if you wanted to kill someone and get away with it, how would you do it? And people are so fast. Hilarious. They're all, and the best one was I was in Hawaii and on a boat, and the guy's like, oh, there's just a million ways you can do it. I'm like, all right, I'm on your good side again.
What was his profession?
Pardon?
What was his profession?
He was the boat driver, so he was the tour operator. But I know another guy who's like a contractor, and I asked him, and he's like, well, I haven't thought about it, but I would just cut a hole in the drywall and put stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh, you people! Everyone has an idea.
Anytime you're doing research and you tell people what it's for, they are so accommodating.
So much.
I had a behind-the-scenes tour at the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh, for a book, Pottingshed Mystery, and the director of horticulture took me around, and his assistant, when I first got there, I had explained to them in my email, what it was I was looking for, and I said it again when we met in person, and they both said, oh, we have a few people we'd like to suggest for victims.
That's hilarious. Do you have, because I do that occasionally, I get into places with the writer angle, but do you have, since you've gotten 15 mystery books, do you have suggestions on how people can get inside?
And no, I just email anybody I can think of that I want to talk with, or someplace I want to see. People love it.
It's so fun. Yeah, I have to agree.
I find when you tell people you're a writer and then you tell them you write murder mysteries, they are fascinated. They want to know how you find your ideas, what you do. But I've never asked that question to people with their job related. I'm going to start doing that. Yeah, I find people are willing to give you information when they know you're a writer. I think people all want to share what they know. So
you just touched on a good question. How do you guys come up with your ideas? And I sort of hate that question because I don't. I'm like, I don't know, but I'll ask you guys anyway. Where do your ideas come from for your murder mysteries? Alice, let's start with you. Or we can go to you last.
It usually, I would say, starts off with some sort of an odd notion that I want to pursue. Like with this one that I'm working on now about, what's it like how do you live when you know that you have gone to that extreme, you have paid the price for it. And but I would say my Christmas mystery probably was kicked off by the scene that takes place on Christmas Eve, which I will not explain, but if you read it, you will know it's a pretty seminal scene, and probably one that everyone has thought of at one time or another as they're sitting there on Christmas Eve. But that's it. Doesn't I'm not a planner, so I don't have a plot. It's more like some little quirky thing that starts the ball rolling, and then it just goes from there.
Excellent. Jen or Marty, either of you?
Well, I seem to always have things percolating up. I don't know. Sometimes I know where they come from. In one of the books, Birds of a Feather series, it was about the poisoning of predator birds in England, and how sparrowhawks are often targeted they're killing off the pheasants. And a guy from the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds just laughed at that. He said, there are more pheasants killed on the roads than there are sparrows. So, that prompted something. But it may not be the main theme, but it may start just working its way around. So obviously with the first edition library series, I have this wealth of information to work from. And so book 3, which of course is not coming out till next year, so I've had Agatha Christie, Dorothy L. Sayers. Book 3 is Daphne du Maurier. And I know she's lists of Golden Age of Mystery writers, but she was a favorite of the woman who created the library to begin with. So that's my excuse. I have a who chose her, and so I blame it on the character. So I got to use Frenchman's Creek. So, but as far as even the Potting Shed Mysteries, there's a lot in gardening you can do. So I'm writing something about a medieval herb garden now. So.
Jen, you have 2 books done, but 6 already planned. How do you come up with your ideas?
Well, I think it's because I love New Orleans so much, and there's so many different aspects to it. People only know it as a tourist thing, and my character is new to town, so I can sort of use that angle of introducing people into the city. Like book 2, I mentioned, is about voodoo. It's a lot about Marie Laveau, the voodoo queen, and there's so many misconceptions about her, which I learned through my tour guides and research. And I really wanted to explore that, her and voodoo, and just kind of explaining that. And then book 3 is going to be about a haunted hotel, because ghosts are very prevalent in New Orleans. Book 5 is the vampire book. Yeah. So, the things that interest me about New Orleans, the people, the food, stories that you hear, those were kind of my starting points for my ideas. And I know how I want Sammy's life to go, my main character. So I know where she needs to be at certain books, and I've been able to use those things that I love, like I said, ghosts and vampires and voodoo and all that, to incorporate into her life and her story arc. So,
and I think that I just come up with anything from anywhere. One of them, my book, The Caramel Crow, all I had to start with was the title, The Caramel Crow. But I was so intrigued by the idea of a caramel crow, which is I should learn how to say this word. I can only write it. Leucistic. It's like sort of like albino, but it's not albino. But it's but the caramel crow. And then I was like, well, what would a murder around a caramel crow involve? And so of course there's birding and all these birders. But I just I think if anyone's looking for how do you write a book and where do you get up with your ideas, like anything, you just start being curious about anything, and especially with a murder mystery. Here's a thing. How would a murder happen around that thing? And then it's the joy of it. Marty, I want to ask you about, since you have how many different series?
This is my 3rd series, first edition library.
So what made you, because I'm starting my 2nd series, but I also have a standalone. What made you decide to go into another series instead of, but you're also continuing your other ones, right?
Well, sort of. So here's what happened.
Yeah.
My first series are with Alibi, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House. And it was their foray into digital-only publishing. It started in about 2014. So my first contract was with them for the Potting Shed Mysteries. And while I was writing that, my editor there, fabulous editor, who is now freelance, anybody want a recommendation, I'll give you his name, said to my agent, would Marty be interested in writing a series about birds? Because I was writing about gardens, and when you're outdoors, there are birds, and so I had mentioned them. And so I said, well, sure. And so there came the bird series, which I set in Suffolk because we spend a lot of time in Suffolk. And then Alibi closed its doors. So it's like every author's thought is, oh my gosh, what's going to happen now? But I had an agent. That's another thing. Oh my gosh, I have to find a new agent. Oh, I have a fabulous agent. And she said, have you ever thought about writing a third series? Well, of course I had. I had this in the back of my head. It's fun to have and so I explored that idea, came up with a premise, wrote a 3-page description. It's really easy to come up with 2 or 3 sentences about the next 3 or 4 books. And later on, I think, how in the world would I do that? So that series, this series, the first edition library series, got shopped around, and Berkeley bought it. So now I'm in print, and also the other 2 series are still in ebook only. I am working on number 8, Potting Shed, and if it doesn't get sold, then I'll put it up myself.
Great. Okay, well, let's talk about how we write, because the very first murder mystery I wrote, Death at Glacier Lake, I wrote mostly because I was like, I don't know if I could even do this. This seems hard, and I'm going to try. And I still think it's really hard, but I love it, but I think it's really hard. So I need tips. So how do you guys go about writing a mystery? Do you start, like Jen, it sounds like you, let's start with you. It sounds like you know everything plotted out, but do you have all your characters? Do you have everything that's going to happen? Like, how do you plot it out, and how do you write it?
I have the ideas, and like I said, I start an outline, but I find that outline sometimes goes out the window, or I have to rearrange things. I'm part of a really great critique group. None of them write mysteries, so I have to sometimes explain things to them, but they are a really great sounding board, because I had a character that I thought was okay, and boy, they hated him. They trashed him. But it helped me create actually a new character who I adore to no end and will be continuing on in other books. So I've learned to kind of have an outline to start with, but don't be married to it. I find that, again, inspiration will come from out of nowhere. It gives me at least a starting point and some sort of framework to go with, because I know I've got to have my, for me, it's 2 murders. It's, I've got a rhythm now to, I think, how my books go. So I can do my outline quickly, but it just goes crazy sometimes. The characters decide what they want to do, and you have to follow them.
Do you always know, and this, I'm going to ask all of you this, do you always know, Jen, who's going to be the murderer from the start?
No, actually, when I started my first book took me probably almost 4 years to write, because I wasn't really serious about it in the beginning. And then my husband finally said, "You're a writer, right?" So I took it to heart. I knew sort of who I wanted the murderer to be, but it evolved actually as I firmed up the story. And then I realized, but book 2, I knew who was going to be. That one I kind of had. Now the other books, no. Book 3, I think I know, but it could change as I get farther into it. So we'll see.
Alice, how do you write? How do you write a book?
One word at a time. I'm a big rewriter. I like to do the sort of fast first draft, and then I rewrite about 500 times. And everything evolves sometimes predictably, sometimes not, but very slow. And so I'm glad that I work with a publisher who's just always very happy to hear from me whenever I'm. I do know I know what the main plot points are from the beginning. I can't quite imagine how you write without knowing who the murderer is myself. I know it's true, and I can see why there would be an evolutionary surprise there, but I know who the murderer is. Sometimes more murders happen than I expected, but that through line feels to me like the spine story that I need. So I go back and forth a lot. I read out loud a lot. I do numerous drafts. And, I come from a short story writing background, so it's still a little bit of a new thing to me to write full-length books. This is my third that I'm working on. And different sensibility in terms of how much time you should spend and how it's going to develop is still something that is new to me. So I just keep plotzing along. Actually.
Yeah. Marty, how about you? You're our pro.
Well, I always know who the victim is, and I always know who the murderer is at the beginning of the book. And I hear of other authors saying, I had no idea who did it until the very end. I have tried then at the beginning of to think, well, maybe that isn't the murderer. Maybe somebody else did it. But no, I'm right. I know who the murderer is. I come from a nonfiction background. I was a garden writer for many years, and I have several garden books out. And I wrote for the Post-Intelligencer for years on the garden page. And so I came to writing fiction by a friend of mine saying, it took her about a year. Every once in a while she would say, you should write a garden mystery. No, I don't write fiction. You should write it. Every once in a while she would, and finally I said, okay, fine. And then I started writing, and that was just about it. I write, we all have our methods, and we all love our methods, and I'm glad we do. I write something, and then I go back and edit that. I'm afraid if I write a quick short draft, I will forget everything that I wanted to put in. So I write, I go back and I edit, and then I go forward and write some more, and then I go back and I edit and I write some more. So by the time I get to the end of a book, I only need one more draft, and also because, like Jen, I'm in a writing group, and we meet weekly, and we read our pieces aloud weekly. Yeah. So that is an enormous help to me. And so by the time I actually send it to my editor, I've had at the beginning, now, they're used to it. At the beginning, the editor would say, manuscript is so clean. Well, that's not only do I have a writing group, but my husband is a copy editor.
Oh, so married well.
Before I send it off. So and it's just the way that suits me. We all find a way that suits our methods, and that's what I do.
Well, talk to me about clues, red herrings. How do you decide? Because I don't like books personally, and maybe other people don't care, but I don't like mysteries where you couldn't have figured it out if you were trying really hard. Like I feel like you should be able to go through and pick up the threads even if you didn't see them. So how do you ensure that there are enough threads, but that they're hidden enough that people aren't like, obviously it's the butler, how do you put your clues in before or after? How do you guys do that? Marty, let's start with you.
Some of mine are I know they're going to be clues. Some of them I know, and others kind of come along when I've done like the first draft, and I go back and go, I think I need to make this a little more obvious, or sometimes I have to downplay something because I'm like, oh, that kind of, I remember I had one scene in my first book and I was like, well, that sort of gives it away. I had to, so I have to rework, but I think it helps to have at least a few to know, but as the story goes on, you'll know. And then, like I said, on a next draft, you kind of realize, because I hate those books too, where you couldn't have guessed who that is. You at least to have some inkling. I love to be surprised. And when people told me they were surprised who the murderer was in my first book, I was thrilled. But yet when I went over with them, well, remember this or that, and they went, oh, okay. So I think it's important to try to surprise people, but give them a chance to figure it out.
My favorite clues are the ones that I have planted and I didn't know I planted them. So when I go back, I think, whoa, I can use that. That's
yeah.
I have a tendency, and I can imagine that we all do this. I'll think, oh, I'm too obvious here. And I read it to my writing group, and they don't see it. They don't see it at all. So it's a worrying thing, Am I being too obvious? Am I being too obtuse? a happy medium. I personally don't feel like I find a happy medium.
It's hard. Alice, what about you?
I think it's one of the really fascinating things about writing a mystery, because you, as the writer, can never, well, in any writing project, you yourself can never experience what you've written the way your reader will, because you bring into it everything that you thought you were writing and the things about, and so you have to keep trying to see what is the picture that the reader is seeing. And one of the challenging things, since I do know who the murderer is, the murderer has to be in plain sight, but not to the reader. And so developing those threads of like, what are the other plausible solutions that disguise, so to speak, it's totally obvious who did it. I know who did it. But like Marty, I also just love it when some detail that I planted in the story unconsciously becomes something that really resonates or really just is a fabulous clue. But and because I didn't even plan it, it's it wows me while I discover it.
Beautiful. Do you guys find that when you're like deeply ensconced in the middle of a book, that you don't get any sleep? Because as soon as you lie down, your brain's like, "Ooh, here's an idea, here's an idea, here's an idea." Like, does that happen to everybody?
It's the pad of paper and pen by the bed.
Exactly. Yes, and I can write in the dark really well. Okay. I was going to ask another thing, but I know we're getting close to time here. So Marty or Alice or Jen, but I think Marty and Alice are more involved. I found you guys through a group called Sisters in Crime. You all are Sisters in Crime. So one of you want to tell me, what is Sisters in Crime? Where is it? Who can join? How does that work?
Alice?
Well, of course, where it is right now is on Zoom. So it's actually a very good time to join, because all the obstacles of commuting to where our in-person location is normally have been moved, and we've seen a lot more people are showing up. Last time, I think we had people from all the islands, from to Camino, and it's great. People who just could not possibly have come. But meetings are the second Thursday of the month at 7 p.m. And anybody can attend. You do not have to join Sisters in Crime in order to come to the meetings. Of course, we hope that you will. And Sisters in Crime was founded about 38, almost 40 years ago by Sarah Blansky and other women writers. I think they had just left a BoucherCon, or they had just left a Mystery Writers of America meeting, and they were feeling like a little bit disgruntled about how the mystery writing world was just way too skewed toward the men, that women had trouble getting published, they didn't get as much money, they didn't get reviewed, they didn't win awards, and to create an organization that would foster the development of women crime writers, and that became Sisters in Crime.
And it's national, right? But also there's local.
Mostly a couple of international chapters, but it is primarily U.S. and Western Canada, I think.
Okay.
Have a website. Just better Google Sisters in Crime rather than count on me to.
Excellent. Okay.
Chapter is Puget Sound.
Puget Sound. Okay. And then a couple more questions. Books that you're loving, that you recommend, authors, mystery authors that you love. You can go back as far as Agatha Christie if you like. Anyone. So Jen, start with you.
I think my current favorite writer probably is Louise Penny. I love her books because they're police procedural, yet they have a cozy feel because you've got the small town of Three Pines, but yet you've got that whole police and aspect of it. So it's a great balance. And I think there are 15 books in the series. I love series. I'm a big fan of series because I like to see the characters grow and different things. I love a standalone though. Ruth Ware, I like Turn of the Key was the last book I read of hers, and I enjoyed that. It was a different, it was unexpected, some of the things in that book. And so I like domestic suspense. I like thrillers. Maybe one day I'll write those. I have some ideas that I have on my own notepads around the house. But yeah, I like series because I want to see the characters grow and things happen and learn about them. And like I said, Louise Penny I love because they're Canadian and I learned things about Quebec that I hadn't known. So, but that's who I'm reading these days. But I'll read anything basically. My list at the library is really long right now. My whole list, so I need to go pick those up.
Excellent. Marty?
During the lockdown, I discovered that Georgette Heyer wrote mysteries. I had no idea. She was a Regency romance writer. And so I read, she wrote about 15 or 20 mysteries, and I read them all and enjoyed them thoroughly.
Wonderful. Alice?
I guess I would cite the one that I most recently read that just blew me away, which was The Darkest Evening by Anne Cleaves. It's the latest era book, and I was just stunned by how good it was, and just felt like I was in the hand of a master.
Yeah.
And the way she wove everything together and the pace. Plus, it's set in the snow. I'm a big sucker for stories that are set in the snow. So I guess I would also mention Marty's least favorite book by Dorothy L. Sayers, Taylor's. There's some books that I just keep going back to. I think part of the reason I became a mystery writer was because I wanted to grow up to be Harriet Vane. With murder going through that, and Peter Wimsey, no. I just want to be Harriet Vane.
Excellent. Well, I agree with you about Anne Cleaves. I love Anne Cleaves. She wrote the Vera Stanhope books. She also wrote the Shetland books, which if you have, I don't know what Shetland is on Acorn. I mean, you could read them, but also Shetland's on Acorn, I think, or is it on Netflix?
I think Acorn or BritBox. Yeah.
It's so good. I got one or the other of those just to get the most recent season because it's so good. And then also, obviously, the Nancy Drew and Agatha Christie, but also M.C. Beaton, who wrote the Hamish, and Agatha Raisin. So I just enjoy those. Those were so good. And I know, Alice, you knew her, right? Yeah.
Friend of ours in Cotswolds, but then also we had a period where we were living in Paris, and she had an apartment in Paris, so we could see her and her husband there. She was.
Yeah, so good, so good. Okay.
I wouldn't try to be her, but I loved her.
Yeah. I gave you guys an assignment. I told you I was going to ask you to find, because I feel like we need a little kindness. So I wanted us all to be noticing kindnesses around us. And so did anyone notice a kindness that you saw performed to anyone recently, or that you happened to experience yourself, and it can be something really small. I just want to engage us in kindness in the world.
Well, I will say this sounds like, fairy tale story, but Kara in my writing group got a call from her brother who lives we're north of Seattle and he lives south of Seattle, on Monday night to say this little scrawny kitten has showed up at his house and he needed help. Kara's a cat person. She drove down there after work, bought everything he needed for emergency cat care. She said this little cat was just the scrawniest thing, tiny kitten. And she picked it up and it immediately crawled under her jacket and started purring. I know.
Very sweet.
Kara has found a home for it.
Oh,
She's cats are really home. So
beautiful.
That's the best.
That's a nice story. Thank you. Jen or Alice, did you have something you saw or experienced?
I just think in general, I've been very fortunate. I live on a small island. Well, not that small, I guess, but everyone has really taken this, this time to heart and helped out as far as keeping in touch with people. I think that was one of the things we were all very worried about is being lonely. I mean, even if you have people in your house, you still need other people in your lives. And our group has made sure to make sure everyone is involved. We do online trivia once a week. We'll meet so if someone just needs to see somebody, we'll be like, okay, we'll meet at the park 6 feet away, masks on, we'll go for a walk. So I think the kindness has just been there and taking care of each other, and whatever you need you be, whether it's online or to meet in person, social distancing, or just to, answer their texts late at night because they're going nuts. So I just think it's that extra kindness that everyone has shown to each other here that I'm very proud of our group for that.
Have been really stepping up. I like that.
Yeah.
Alice, did you see anything recently?
Well, I feel like I thought was sort of duplicative because I was going to mention one of my ways of de-stressing, but not exactly, is to bring the world down to a very small point. And there's a group on Facebook called The Lost Cats of Snohomish County.
Oh.
And I'm a member of that group because one of my cats got lost. And there are people on that group who go to enormous lengths to help other people whose cats are lost. There are lots of texts going back and forth.
That's so great.
There's actually a group now, I wish I could remember their names, but there's guys, I think they're guys, who actually volunteer. If you contact them, they will come and they will claim one of these, 100 for free. So I can afford to do it.
Wow.
And so it seems, when you look at like 227,000 people have died, and 45 children are separated from their parents, and all these just horrific things. And you think, wow, cat,
Oops.
Well, it's trying to call me.
That's my fear, is that would happen to me.
Touch with me. I think families have found new ways of staying in touch, and my family is very dispersed. We're planning to have our first ever Zoom holiday party.
Oh, nice.
We never begin to have in life, and so I'm very excited about it. I think it's going to be a great holiday season.
Wonderful. Yeah. I love that. And my kindness that I've seen is that there's just so many people who are stepping up to help people get rides to the polls if they need them, like just free rides all over the country from just strangers helping strangers. And like you were saying, Jen, like people are just stepping up in really beautiful ways, all in so many beautiful ways. So and I appreciate that you kind of humored me with this, because I'm trying to remember how much kindness there is in the world and how good people are, because sometimes it's getting hard these days. Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to finish.
Joy to the polls.
Oh my gosh, love that. Tell us about that.
Yeah.
They're dancing and
And I'm not sure exactly who the founder of it was, but it's a nonprofit group that has pulled in people from all over the country, and they're calling their campaign Joy to the Polls. And there are local groups that are going to where people are standing in line, and they're bringing live music on trucks, and they're getting people to dance and sing while they wait in these long, ridiculous lines.
Yeah. I love that. I love that people are so creative in coming up with things like that. That's just amazing. Okay, I'm going to go through, and I'm going to put your slide up for each of you, and I'll tell you who's up, and I'm going to have you tell us a little bit more. We've got a book coming out November 1st. We've got a book coming out December 1st, and we've got a book coming out after that. So Jen, I'm going to put your slide up. Tell us again about what's coming out on November 1st or October 31st.
It's the next. Oh, yeah, Halloween. It's the second book in my French Quarter series. It's called The Gates to the Afterlife, and it is about, like I mentioned, it's about voodoo. It is about there is a ceremony you follow for 7 parts, and it's supposed to get you to the afterlife so you can contact your relatives who have passed on, and unfortunately, it doesn't go to plan. Someone's using it for murder. So Sammy, and as she settles into New Orleans, has to figure that out.
Excellent. Okay, Marty, you're next. I've got your slide up. What's coming out on December 1st?
December 1st, Murder is a Must comes out. Book 2 in the first edition library series. Haley still trying to make for herself as curator in Middlebank House in Bath, and she decides that they need to put on an exhibition about Lady Fowling's life. Lady Fowling created the library to begin with, and she runs into some trouble.
Okay, excellent. And then Alice, you tell us what you want to tell us about what your book is coming up next, or anything else you want to tell us.
I can tell you that right now my first 2 books are on sale through November 2nd. They're 99 cents
Oh,
each. And Thunder in English Heaven begins right now, October 30th. And it's an autumn story with Halloween and Remembrance Day and Guy Fawkes Day. It's a very good time for murder in England. Second book is set at Christmas. So if you want, this is exactly the right season to read these. And then you will be ready when the third book comes out in the early spring.
fantastic. Okay. And here are my books again. The top ones are murder mysteries. The bottom ones are young adult. They're great, really super popular with parents looking for books for kids, but not the top ones. Those are murder mysteries. Now's not the time, people. All right. Well, thank you all. This was so much fun. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
And we'll do it again sometime. And
Yeah.
if anyone wants to find Sisters in Crime, search on Sisters in Crime Puget Sound chapter. And everybody, take care of yourselves. And thank you.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks.
Bye.